And so the big things that are out there, the big three technologies that would really sort of help Alberta get move in this direction would be energy efficiency, wind power, and cogeneration. Obviously, there's not one silver bullet that would get us to where we want it to go, but those are the three large technologies that would really help move along the way. So, is it possible to do in Alberta what they did in Ontario? Well, there's actually better wind. Southern Alberta has much better wind than Ontario has. It's actually much sunnier, and we've got a lot more cow poop in Alberta than there is in Ontario. There's a lot more space in the province. There's a lot fewer people, particularly in Southern Ontario, where all the people are. And so there is the opportunity to deploy these technologies across the province. And so in some ways, this is actually much easier to do in Alberta than it is in Ontario. And I think what's important to recognize is when this campaign started, I remember I had a conversation with a friend of mine, Paul Geip, who was really instrumental in making this all happen. And we were at the Canadian Wind Energy Association conference in Toronto just a month ago. And a guy from Environment Canada came up to us and said, you know, I got to hand it to you because 5 years ago, when you came to me and asked for money to fund this campaign, I told you you were insane. I basically said, you know, good luck, but it's impossible. There's just no way Ontario would do something like this. And I'm here to eat my words, basically, is what he said. And so don't despair that in Ontario people thought that this wasn't even on the map 5 years ago in Ontario. Another important, I'm not going to go into this, but another important thing to recognize is what's going on in Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia has just announced 25% renewable generation by the year 2015. So in 5 years, they're talking about generating 25% of their power from renewables. Why that's interesting is that Nova Scotia it's a much smaller grid than Alberta, but it's a sister grid in the sense that it's about 70% coal. And so in some ways, it's similar to Alberta in the way it's set up. So again, it's a coal-based province that is looking at seriously ramping up renewables and starting to phase out coal. And so I think it's important for Alberta to watch what's going on in Nova Scotia and watch the level of ambition and watch how successful they're going to be. The question is there public support in Alberta to do this sort of thing? So this is hard to read, so I'll read it to you. This is a question that was put to Albertans and, on an Ipsos Reid poll of about 800 Albertans. This is about 6 months old now, but it says, in the past, the Alberta government has provided companies with subsidies for oil and gas development. These subsidies have helped to develop the industry as well as to create jobs. In the future, would you prefer that the government of Alberta provides subsidies to the oil and gas development, or would you prefer that the government of Alberta provides subsidies to the development of renewable and clean energy options? So, out of 800 randomly sampled Albertans, does anyone want to take a guess at their preferred area for the government to subsidize? How many would think it's oil and gas? Does anyone want to take a stab at what renewable energy was actually the #1 level of support? Does anyone want to take a guess at how much support there is from the average Albertan for renewable energy subsidies? Almost 80% of Albertans said they would like to see the government of Alberta subsidizing renewable energy development. In fact, if you add, 8% said both. So we're looking at 85% of Albertans said they would like to see the Alberta government moving on renewable energy. I don't know of any political issue that you get 85% support for. And so I think the people of Alberta are clearly ahead of the politicians on this issue. But this stuff doesn't happen by itself. And Germany, who is the leader in renewable energy, is an important country to look at. And they're important to look at because they actually have the same size electricity system as Canada in terms of overall generation. But they set targets for themselves to achieve. And they're looking at, they were looking at 12% by the year 2010, all the way to close to 100% renewable energy. This isn't renewable electricity, but 100% renewable energy in the country by the year 2050. They've exceeded this target. They're at 15% now. They hit 15% in the year 2008. And so I think it's important to recognize that if you want to get going somewhere, you need to have ambitious targets, but you also need to have ambitious policies that are going to push the country or push the jurisdiction in that direction. So I said Germany is an exciting country to look at. 15% of their electricity supply is currently coming from renewable sources, 90,000 people employed in wind energy, 50,000 employed in photovoltaics, almost 300,000 Germans are employed in the renewable energy industry, and about a $50 billion industry in Germany right now. So this is a big industry with lots of dollars and lots of jobs that are associated with it. In terms of how much can you actually get onto the grid, Denmark has been generating about 20% of its power from the wind since for the last 10 years, since about 2000, since they've had about 20% of their power come from just from the wind. Spain's at about 11%, and on a really, really windy day in Spain, I think it happens almost every Easter because people are off for celebrating Easter, and I guess it's windy in March, and it's happened for the last 2 years, and we'll see if it happens again this year, but 40% of their grid comes from the wind around Easter time, or it has for the last 2 years. That's almost half of the grid power comes from the wind. And so the point here is that you can actually be putting seriously large amounts of wind power onto the grid. This isn't something we need to be talking about sort of on the fringes, or a few solar panels here and there, a few wind turbines here and there. This can become really the basis of an electricity system. Canada has a long way to go to get there, but we actually have an easier challenge because of our large hydro base in terms of an overall country. So here's what Denmark did. Denmark moved from, in the mid-'80s, of several large centralized plants to a system of decentralized plants all over the country. And in about 10 years, they went from about 2% of their electricity up to about 20% of their power. Their electricity emissions, they were basically a coal-based country as well. Their emissions dropped by about 30% over that period of time. And their economy grew by 45%. During that same period of time. So this doesn't have to be done. We're not talking about the economy versus the environment. This is something that can be done and generate jobs. In fact, Denmark right now, the manufacture and export of wind turbines is their second largest industry. And so I think what's important to recognize here is that the Europeans went through growing pains as well. This wasn't something that was just sort of necessarily easy for them to do, but they went through technical issues and they went through policy issues to get where they wanted to go. So to sum up, if you take one thing away from tonight, is that renewable really is doable. And trade-offs, you are going to need to make trade-offs. It is going to cost a little more money. You may be looking at new transmission line development. This isn't a perfect technology, but we can get there. It doesn't happen by accident. This doesn't happen unless the government leads, unless people want it to happen. It's not going to happen by itself. You need leadership at government levels, you need utilities to lead, and you need individuals to lead. And I'm here really to be a hope monger, I think. And the environment movement often gets called fear mongers. And I'm here to hope monger a little bit that this really is possible. This really is an exciting time. And I hope you leave here being a hope monger yourself, that this can be done.